He had about 6 tumors, I think, in his lungs and some in his liver, and his primary site was at the tip of his tailbone, and it was the size of a Nerf football, if you can believe that, at 21 months old. In that whole 5 years, Corey had 5 chemotherapy protocols, and he had 15 surgeries. They get so frail and small and thin from being on chemotherapy, being sick and throwing up. And it's just stressful being that your child's hungry and you can't feed them because they're going to do a surgery. And you never knew if the surgery was going to help or if it was going to damage something else. You're supposed to be signing paperwork to do things to help him. He comes out of it and they can't control his bowels anymore. And he's ashamed. How can I go to school in diapers? He wanted desperately to go back to school. And I got the literature and I let him look at it of what a colostomy looked like. And I told him that this would solve the problem. But he would have to wear a bag. And he's like, I want to do it. Let's do it. He loved his school. Being at school was being around other normal kids, making friends, getting to do things that kids get to do instead of being in a hospital. So he loved school. He begged me to go to school. I think if you ask any one of them, they would say he was always cheery and happy. He never, not until the very end when you could really see that he was really getting ill. No matter what, he would always come out smiling. I remember he loved going to school so much that the Mayfield man at the school, he needed to gain some weight. And the milkman ordered him whole milk, which they're not supposed to have in school, but he ordered and paid for it himself so that Corey could have whole milk. And I remember him coming home one day and saying, he said, Mom, I don't want to ever grow up and go to another school because everybody at my school thinks I'm the specialist. And that was his word, the specialist. So I told him at school what he had said about being the specialist. And so they put banners up at the school that said, Corey Cash is our specialist. It never seemed he was sick. They just loved him, and he loved them. He had a best friend that he was really close to. Nobody ever made fun of him because he had a colostomy. They knew it, but the kids were all right with it. They would have fun with it sometimes. Those can make some noises that are kind of funny to kids. And the consistent thing that I always heard was how well he was handling it. But I think that was just, if you'd met him, he had such a sweet personality, almost like there was a piece of God in him already. Not that I don't think that there is with every child, but it's almost like he had a greater understanding. He was wise above his years. We went back over for a checkup, and they found a tumor behind his bladder. Wanted to take his bladder out and do some experimental chemotherapy, but they said that they didn't have a plan to cure him anymore. I was on the plane and I leaned over and looked at him and I said, when we went back to St. Jude's and had your CAT scan, they found another tumor. And he instantly starts bawling, crying, just uncontrollably, the sobbing kind type. And he looks at me and he said, you said it was gone, but you said it was gone. And I said, well, it was, but it's come back again. This is the 5th time that it had returned. And he knew what that meant. I mean, he was long in the tooth, having a lot of chemotherapy and surgeries and radiation. And he looked at me, and the second sentence he said was, I do not want to have any more chemotherapy, and I do not want to have radiation, and I do not want to have surgery. I said, well, fine, then you don't have to. And he went, really? I don't have to? I said, no, you don't have to. He said, but am I going to die? And I said, well, we've had a lot of friends over the years at St. Jude's that have died. And if you've got cancer, you've got a choice. We can either do therapy chemotherapy, or we can pray and just ask God to heal you. He said, well, I'm going to pray and I'm going to ask God to heal me. I said, that's fine. That's what we're going to do then. And that night before we went to bed, we always said our prayers before we went to bed. And he said, well, we're going to pray that God heals me. And I said, okay, well, let's pray about it. And we prayed the next night. I said, well, let's pray that God healed you. And he said, no, we don't have to. We already prayed it. He had a lot of faith. And I remember praying and asking him, why would this happen to such an innocent child? And what good is it? You know, I was a bit angry. What good is it to pray a hedge of protection over your child if that's not what you're going to do? If you won't honor that, what good is that? And I remember just as clear as the conversation we're having that he said, why do you continue to pray to me as if heaven is a curse when I intended it to be a reward? What God gave me that night was he showed me that this life is like a 1/2-inch mark on a 50-foot ruler. It's nothing. And if you're given a purpose, if you're given a job to do, which Corey was, he affected so many people in his 5 years, that this is just short term. It's not very long. And if 1,000 days on earth is like one day in heaven, then you know he's going to get there and he's going to turn around and he's just going to see me getting there. I mean, it's going to be just like he turned around and saw me. And I remember him saying, I don't want to go have a CAT scan. I said, well, you're going to have to. We've got to figure out why your leg's hurting. And he said, well, Mom, you know, it's the cancer causing my leg to hurt. And I said, well, maybe it is, but we've got to find out for sure. And he said, well, I still don't want to have a CAT scan. He said, Mama, I don't think I'm going to live very long. I said, well, and I said, oh yeah, you're going to live a long life. And look in the mirror and blink your eyes. And we did. And I said, it's just going to be that fast. You'll be in heaven that fast. And he says, but I don't want to go. I don't want to go without you and without Dad and without Cody, which is his brother. And I said, well, but you're going to get to be our leader. You get to go first. You get to be our leader. You know, he thought it was going to be like Disney World, only he didn't want to go without me. We used to really sing, there's a Kurt Franklin song called Lovely Day. And it's all about being down, not feeling good, but there's a new day. God's got a new day, and it's a lovely day because we're going to be with God. And if I concentrate, we sing that sometimes at our church, and if I concentrate just a little, I can still hear him sing that song. Because of that conversation that God and I had in that hospital room, those last 3 years were not nearly as hard on me as you would have thought they would have been, because I had God, and I'd had that conversation. I knew he had a plan, and I almost had come to the point where I felt honored that Corey had a big plan, a big purpose. I don't want to say that I'm glad that he suffered for all of this, but I know that God doesn't see things the way that I see them. I know that for God, he sees the whole picture, and he knows that that suffering was just a small amount of time, and that put Corey and I both in a place where we needed to be to witness to people. Parents of St. Jude's children tend to congregate together. It's like a fellowship. And if you met people that weren't Christians, you could always say, they could be down in the dumps, and you could say, hey, we can pray about this together. We can pray about this and see if God will fix this today and give you some peace. When you've got God, you've got all of that. But if you don't have God, I don't know how they get through it. I don't know how they endured it, because there was no hope for them. For them, if their child died, it was the end. That was the last time that they would ever see them again. For me, if my child died, then I knew that he was going to a caregiver, and he was going to be healthy and whole. And the next time I saw him, I was going to see him a way that I'd never really seen him before.
How great the love Jesus Christ. Upon the cross of Calvary, the blood was shed that pardons me. No longer